All right, so that's the first grant in front of you. The second grant is from me, the not-so-good twin brother. Identical twins, right? So I say, hey, Ma, how you doing? My roommate just got out of rehab. He was in the same place that I was at, and so that you and Dad sent me to, if you might remember. So we're going to throw a big party. So I need $150 for a keg and some booze, and maybe some hash if we can find it. All right, can you spare it, Ma? All right, so now, who in this room would fund the good twin brother? All right, and who in this room would fund me, the evil twin brother? He might, all right, so Raid might, okay. I'm not inviting you, so that's if you thought that was part of it. Anyway, all right, good. So basically that's how study section worked. The vote was 25-2. So if there were two grants, these two grants were in front of us. Since this is the study section is a panel of peers, they valued the appeal of good twin brother more than they valued my appeal. So why did you vote for good twin brother? Allura, you're always willing to tell me your opinion. She's wearing a beer geek shirt. I'm surprised she didn't vote for the evil twin.
I should have worn a different shirt. No, because if I was a mother, then I would want my son to go to grad school and be successful. So letting him buy the textbook and have the opportunity to continue on his life.
And why did you vote against me?
It was very sloppily written.
Oh, poorly written.
You didn't even ask how much money you wanted.
Oh, okay.
You had an itemized list, but no actual budget.
No budget. All right. So that was the big reason. You voted for me, so just to be cantankerous and different? Anyway, the point is that both of these people gave really detailed evaluations of why they would fund or not fund that appeal. And so no budget, not well written, that's really right up my alley because we're going to tell you about how to write. So thank you. You gave good appeal, good demonstration. You want the project to be successful, right? So that's what we want to do. So the study section is going to do the same thing, using exactly the criteria that you used. That is your own experience. All of you have some experience that let you be eligible for that particular peer review panel. Right? Okay, so let's go. I don't know how I'm going to run this stuff, so excuse me. All right. So I warned you, audience participation. What makes an excellent grant? Shout out some ideas. Innovative. Clear. High impact.
Gets funded.
Okay. Mike is very practical. Gets funded. So I had this, excellent ideas, and excellent ideas. It's like real estate. Innovative, high impact, all of those things are excellent. Those are part of the criteria. But, and somebody said clear. So all right, so who decides if a grant is excellent? The applicant, the study section review administrator, the reviewers, the program officer, or at NIH, the council? The reviewers. When you call up and you talk to the program officer and he or she tells you, oh, this is a really good idea, how much is that worth? Not so much. When the reviewers put their stamp on it and with a good score and say it's a good idea, Amy, how much is that worth? A lot. So it's the reviewers. So it's just like the good twin brother and the evil twin brother. They knew what to say to their mother, at least the good twin brother did, to make the idea seem excellent. Now the good twin brother is probably going to scoff and contribute to the party. So that's a different issue. But the reviewers decide whether this is an excellent idea. So when you write your grant, you're talking to the reviewers. Okay? So we have two challenges, and the first one is you got to have truly excellent ideas. Not a half-assed excellent idea, not a sort of a good idea, not an idea that's never been done before, but something that was excellent. And we can think about and debate what that means. Mike is practical, says it means it gets funded. All right. And then you have to communicate them clearly to a diverse group of reviewers. So and this is key, if the reviewers cannot see how truly excellent your ideas are, your grant will not get an excellent score. In other words, if you've got really good science and a lousy sales pitch or a poor budget or any of a whole bunch of other things that mean you're not been clear in what you're asking for, they're not going to see the excellent science. So you've got to have what I look at as a good sales pitch. It's got to be polished, clear, well written, and not just well written by your own opinion, but well written by the reviewer's opinion. All right, so this basically says the same thing. If you've got good ideas and a bad presentation is not going to be scored, you can actually if you use some of the things that we learned today, you can take a fairly bad idea and a really excellent presentation, and you can fool some of the reviewers into thinking that it's good science, and they'll give you a decent score, but it probably won't get funded. I like to say that a good grant writer can get anything into the top half. So it's sort of like a lawyer can indict a salami sandwich at a grand jury. But you really need to have both the best science and an excellent presentation in order to get these days into the top 10%. What does that mean, the top 10%? There's what, about 30 people in the room, Beth? So that means if all of you wrote a grant and sent it in tomorrow, 3 of you would get funded. The other 27, too bad. And I'm not saying anybody's better or smarter or whatever, but that's the way it works. 3 grants out of 30 would get funded. So when you write a grant, you got a lot of pieces. Hypothesis and long-term objectives, specific aims, background and significance, progress in preliminary studies, research design and methods, and literature cited. Every grant has these pieces in some way, shape, or form. They're in they give different titles for different agencies. They have different names. They have different emphasis. Sometimes they break up, background and significance into different places. But all of those things go there. When I'm on a study section, and who in this room has been on study section? All right, we've got 2 back there. The first page, what's the first page you read when you read a grant, Mike?
Probably the summary.
The summary, and the second page?
Aims.
Specific aims. Amy, what's the first page you read when you read a grant?
Specific aims.
The specific aims. So that's,
CV.
and CV. All right, so slightly different emphasis. I turn immediately to the specific aims page. So this specific aims page, at least for an NIH grant, but for NSF grants, it's got a little different name, but it's the same thing, is to tell the reviewers what you are going to do specifically. This isn't called the general aims page. This isn't called the sort of what I think I might want to do. This is the specific aims. This is what you want to do. How long does it take you to read one page? 2 minutes? In those 2 minutes, you have the attention of the reviewer. And if they come away with this, scratching their heads and saying, I don't know what the proposal is, you're not going to get a very good score. But if they come away saying, wow, this is really clear, I understand it, this is exciting and innovative, I want my mother to send them a lot of money, then this is going to be what gets their attention. The reviewers are talking to a group. When you send in a grant, there's 2 or 3 people who read your grant carefully, and then they sell your ideas to the rest of the study section. If they think your ideas are okay, they're not going to work too hard for you. If they think you've got the best grant since the invention of sliced bread, they're going to give you a lot of sales pitch to the project. That's what you want. So the specific aims page is the single most important page of the grant. And that's what we're going to spend most of the rest of the time talking about. You got to do these first. And you're going to use these as to create a roadmap of the whole project. Most people try to put a whole bunch of background at the beginning. That first paragraph of the specific aims, this is important because, well, that's why there's a background section. So you want to tell them right off the top why this is important. Common fatal flaw is you write a grant with aim 1 as the key. If it fails, then the whole grant collapses. Experimental design, rest of the proposal, and so on. That's what you write when. So who in this room has written a paper? All right. So this is a graph of papers written on the x-axis and papers read divided by papers written on the y-axis. So when you write your first scientific paper, you've read somewhere between 100 and 1,000 scientific papers. And what that means is internally, you have a picture of what a good paper is. So when you're writing your first paper, you have a target that you're shooting for. Okay? When you write your first grant, some people, when they write their first grant, have never seen a grant before. Sometimes you've seen one or two because your mentor shared it with you. So you don't know what a good grant looks like. That's what I'm here to tell you about. That's why this is necessary, is because you have no idea what a good grant looks like. More importantly, you have no idea what a bad grant looks like, what to avoid. You won't know this until some point in your career, you write a really good grant, and they invite you to be on study section and become a reviewer. And then you start reading pages and pages and pages and grants after grant after grant. There's probably 50 to 80 grants in a study section. You read 10 of them for sure. Probably most of the rest of them you'll read parts of. You do that 3 times a year. The end of 20 years, you'll have read about 8,000 grants. By that point, you know what a good grant is. You've read some. You know what a really god-awful grant is because you've seen some. So I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation once. I'm about 8,000 or 9,000 grants under my belt. So I know what the good grants look like. I know what the bad grants look like. And I'm trying to help people avoid both. So the specific aim section is 1 page long. And it has a couple of parts. First, a short general statement, and then a set of aims with a hypothesis. And then I want to emphasize, this is the most important page. If you write it at the last minute, because you've written everything else, that's not so good. You want to write it and then give it to a bunch of people and say, tell me what you think. Do you understand what I'm saying? And then do that about 15 times. Hopefully the readers you've selected are going to give you some good feedback. So we're going to start audience participation. Everybody have pencil and paper?
If you don't raise your hand, we'll bring you.
All right. What I want you to do is think of a project that you are doing or want to do and write 1 aim about that project. Okay? Everybody. I'm not going to read them. So, there's no pressure on you from me. But just do this. Write it, and see what it looks like. I'll give you 5 minutes. The combination of the peninsula on which Spain and Portugal sit. The Iberian Peninsula. Hibernia is Ireland. All right? So you sort of like calling the liver the pancreas, or some other silly mistake like that. You make a mistake that is a mistake of fact that's important to your field. calling it p orbitals when they're d orbitals, you're going to be shafted by the study section. They're going to know what you don't know. So you have to be, not only do you have to be clear, not only does your hypothesis have to be excellent and the good ideas, you got to be right. Your facts have to be right. Okay? So this is just a sort of looking, these are all put together. And then at the end of the proposal, you give them some kind of magic words. If you're, so at the very top, right, this was the words at the top of the proposal. 1 paragraph, succinct introduction to the problem. Not a review of the problem, not a provision of the background, but just enough to make them excited. Look, everybody knows water is a crucial need for agriculture. So there you go, there's your background. 1 sentence. Then there's some other words in there about where the hypothesis comes from, and then you tell them what you're going to tell them about the aim. At the end of the specific aims, you put a paragraph that provides an overview. And the overview is why this is cool, why this is important. If successful, the 3 aims of this proposal will provide for the first time a global perspective on peninsular precipitation. Okay? The perspective will provide a method to distribute irrigation and other agricultural investments. It's going to save $1 trillion per year. So if you're lucky and you do this well, your reviewers will take some of these words and put them in the review without quotations, as if they thought of them, and telling you how great your ideas were in your own words. What's better than being praised with yourself, telling you this is a fabulous grant because it's going to do all of these great things. So this last paragraph, although it's seems a little silly, it's not really what it does integrate everything that you've done. So there's a little bit of an art to it. Okay. So what to write when? We went through this earlier. You write a roadmap. So how do I get feedback and revise? Well, you all have my email address. So that's one person you can ask. If you come to me or anybody else who is an experienced grant writer and hand them a 25-page grant and say, could you read this and tell me what you think? What are you going to say?
If I have time.
Okay. And you, what are you going to say? If I have time, right? And what will you say if I come to you with a 1-page specific aims and I say, can you read this and tell me what you think? Yeah, you're going to say, okay. Are you going to do it? Because you'll never find the time, will you? What about you, Naomi? You agreed to 1 page. So getting somebody to read your specific aims page is an easy way to get them engaged. If you get them engaged, when you come back with the next 3 pages, they're going to read those. You come back with the next 5 pages, they're going to read those. Eventually, they're going to read all 25 pages because you've gotten them hooked. They love your project and they want to help you. Because that's what we do, right? So, almost everybody is willing to read 1 page. All right? I had this for the education school, so Robert Reiser is the dean of research over in the education, but you can substitute Robert Reiser's name for anybody else you want. Organize a mock study section. I can help you with that if you want to organize a mock study section in your school or department. This is easy. We can show you how study sections really work. When I was an associate professor and I wrote my first really good grant, they invited me back because the reviewers aren't your peers. They're people who are successful grant writers. That's who gets invited to be on study section. So when I went on the study section, I was like most people, this is just cronyism. Only the friends of the people on study section get the grants. Okay? And I never was disabused of that fact, of a fact more quickly than when I went on the study section and saw people destroy their friends and destroy their colleagues because they were lousy ideas and praise people you never heard of who were the ones who got funded. It's really amazing how, in the end, when you put 25 people in a room to judge a collection of grants, they really think like scientists. Amy, do you agree that that's what happens? No?
Most cases.
Most cases. That's all I'm saying is most cases, but that's what you want. But you want to be the best grant in the study section, so you want to be the top of the heap. All right? So we can help you there. I repeat this. Take your specific aims section, revise it, revise it, revise it. Get it so that it's exciting. Okay? Now, NIH has a two-step system. Study section rates the science. They're the people who decide if it's excellent. Council decides on funding. So at study section in NIH, the F word, to fund, is never said. Because when people say it, they say, no, don't use the F word. Really. And so there it is, right there. All we're told to do is rank it in terms of its scientific priority. Notice it's scientific priority, not scientific excellence. So it's just sort of like if there were 20 brothers writing to all of you as study sections, there would have been a lot more diversity. You would have had to evaluate each letter rather than the black and white dichotomous presentation that I gave you. You would have been shades of gray. And that's what you have to decide as a study section member, whose idea is the best. And they vote. And then council decides where the cutoff is. Council is a bunch of really big shot scientists, directors of foundations, some lay people thrown in, but it's a bunch of people who make policy decisions as opposed to scientific merit decisions. But because there's also scientists, they might say, well, she's got a really good grant in an area that we want. We really want this project to be funded because we don't have any other projects at all of NIH that deal with that. So it's only 1 point below the cutoff. We should fund that one. And they'll do it. That's called being specialed. And your program officer will ask you about what are the good reasons for that. NSF has a one-step system. So some of you in many fields don't have the NIH to write to. You're going to write your grants to NSF. NSF puts a bunch of people in the room. They put bunches of pieces of paper or other things on the room. And the papers are labeled excellent, very good, good, and awful. Not quite those words, but you get the idea. And then they take a Post-it and they write your name on it, and they put wherever they decide it's done. And then at the end of the day, at the end of the 3 days, which of course takes place in a windowless room, very exciting place to be, they go through and say, the NSF program officer says, we can only fund 5 grants out of these 57 that we reviewed. So then they start at the top and they reorganize them and they agree on which 5 are going to be the top priority. And so when they leave the room of an NSF review panel, you know who was at the top and who's in line next. If you're in the very good panel instead of the excellent panel, what do you think your chances are? Very low. Not quite 0, but very low. If you're in the awful panel, then it's 0. Okay? Private foundations vary. There's a lot of decisions. If you write your grant to the private foundation that's interested in the upholstery of chairs, and you write in a grant that's upholstery of sofas, they might not want to fund it because they're only interested in the upholstery of chairs. Okay? So they really can be very specific, and even though I, as a scientist, might have rated the SOFA grant pretty high, they're not interested, so they're going to throw it out and only fund the chair grants. And they'll do that for whatever their special interests are. So there's a lot of more capriciousness in that. I think I just went through this. They're funded by council and initial review group. So the initial review group, now that's what I've been using all along. That's study section. Initial review group is NIH speak for a bunch of people who sit in a room. Okay? They're scientists. They're people like me, people like Amy, people like Mike, people like presumably like your PI. They're presumably somewhat experts in the field, but it's not quite true. When you write a grant, what are you doing? What do you do for research?
I'm an archaeologist.
She's an archaeologist, all right? So Do you think you're a good archaeologist? All right, so she's a good archaeologist. So when your field, you're the best in the world, right? Not quite, but close. No? When you write a grant, do you think other people know your field better than you do?
Sometimes.
Sometimes? Okay. Well, I'm gonna say you know what you're doing better, or what your ideas are better than all the other archaeologists, because they're your ideas. Okay? So you have to teach the review panel why your ideas are really good. So writing a grant is a lot like teaching. Some of us teach around here, right? So you're going to teach the review panel why your ideas are fabulous. And the study section is non-partial, and so you only contact the SRA is the study section administrator. NSF has a different name for it, but basically you're not supposed to call the members of the study section. If you submit a grant and you know I'm on the study section, if you call me, I have to call somebody and tell them that you contacted me. So you put me in a very uncomfortable situation, and I'm not supposed to break confidentiality, and I'm not supposed to talk to you about what was said. So you're supposed to call Beth, who's the SRA, and she'll tell you what happened without giving away your name. The membership of the study section is usually known. You'll know after the fact who was on it, but you won't know who reviewed your grant. And I can't tell you how many times I had people come up to me at meetings and say, oh yeah, you're on the study section, and I know who reviewed my grant, and they'll tell me, and I'm sitting there smiling internally because I know who reviewed their grant, and it wasn't the people they think. It's somebody else. Because they can't put everybody on everybody else's grant. It's got to be chosen. So even though it's peers, there's experts. There's a lot of expertise. So these people are busy. When you're on study section, you got a job, right? So you sort of got to write your own grants and write your own papers, and you've agreed to do this 3 times a year, and all of a sudden they send you 10 or 12 grants to read. When do you do it? On the plane flight there, sometimes. Usually at home, after the kids go to bed, maybe with a beer or a glass of wine, and you try to stay awake. Because if you fall asleep while you're reading a grant, what does that say about how interesting it is? You want to make them stay awake and say, I love this grant. I can't go to sleep. It's like a Agatha Christie mystery. Well, all right, something better. So it's reviewed intensively and closely by 2 or 3 reviewers who before the meeting give a score that's sent in, and then they use these preliminary scores to rank the grants and decide, usually sometimes the order of review, also to decide upper half from lower half. Usually only the upper half are actually discussed. The lower half are not. We can talk about how they do it, but they read the grants before. And the members who review are assigned. So I'm the SRA, I have a pile of 50 grants, I look at it and I say, oh, Caitlin can review this one, she's got that expertise. Caitlin may not think she has that expertise, but I do, so she'll review that grant. And I'll assign other grants to other people. So the people who review it may not be the best, most knowledgeable people in your field, but they're sort of your peers. They know something, but not as much as you do. And I think that's my point, is they don't know as much as you do about whatever it is that you do. If any of you submit a grant and I'm on the study section, even if I've never met you, I have to leave the room because I'm from FSU and you're from FSU. That's construed as a financial interest. If you're my brother-in-law from a different institution, I have to leave the room. If I've had a big public fight with you, I have to leave the room. If we're both owners of a company, we have to leave the room. If we've published together in the last 5 years, you have to leave the room. So there's a lot of reasons why the people who review your grant are people who are at least visibly objective. Don't have what we think of as a conflict of interest. I never read appendix material on principle. I look at it and I say, if you can't fit it in the allotted pages, too bad. So if you put something really, really important that you want the reviewers to read on the appendix pages, most of the reviewers won't do it. We've been instructed in years past, don't go to the website and look at their websites, because if a study section member goes to your website, well, you can find a list of who's visited your website. And so I know who reviewed my grant. So we've been told not to do that. I don't know if they still do that, but sometimes people would say, oh, I've posted a video of my tissue culture cells on the website so people could go look at it. Well, specifically, we've been told not to do that. So don't have a long attention span. Why? Because you're tired. You've got 10 or 12 grants to read. If it's not interesting, we've got other things on our mind. And I'm going to just say this, read that last line. Do not underestimate the intelligence of the reviewers. That's not a misprint. They're stupid. I can say that. I am one. Why? Because I'm tired. I don't necessarily know what you're talking about. If you don't write it clearly, I won't understand it. So you can't say it too simply or too obliquely or too direct, not too directly. Say it clearly. It's hard to do that because you want to be really difficult and scientific. Treat them like a student and teach them. Like I said to you, there are 3 reasons, when Reed was asking, there are 3 reasons why we should do this work on this organism. 1, 2, 3. Number them. Leave white space so they can find them. So that when they're looking for the reasons, when they're writing their review, they can say, oh, there's 3 reasons. Oh yeah, the reviewer told me. Turn through and it'll stand out on the page because they'll remember what it looked like, not what it said. They can find it quickly. You want to make it easy to read. These days, we all have publication quality capabilities on our desktops. So you can do kinds of things all kinds of things. I always put one text box somewhere in my grant that has something really important, like a set of abbreviations. All the abbreviations that are used in the grant, or all of the various mouse strains that I use, explain what the genetics are. So this is a way, or if you were doing with the cell cycle, I'm going to put the 15 genes involved in my cell cycle analysis. So you can make that like a gray box, like in one of these fancy textbooks for undergraduates that they'll look at and say, oh, okay, there it is. I like that. All right. Some of you are graduate students or postdocs. You write a fellowship. Who's written a fellowship? Anybody? Okay. He not only wrote one, he got one. You guys back there get one? Get yours? All right. So then you come your experience, but you know all fellowships are discussed. They're not, none of them are triaged. They're all discussed. They're reviewed on slightly different criteria. They're voted on by all members. And the thing about it is that the fellowship applications are not approved based only for the science. There's at least 4 criteria. The applicant. This applicant's really good, got good grades, went to a good institution, got good GREs or MCATs or whatever it is. Great, 3 publications. The mentor. The mentor's fabulous, has got a Nobel Prize. Oh no, the mentor sucks, has never published a paper in his or her life. You got a bad mentor, you got a great grant, great applicant. No way, the bad mentor will doom the project. You don't expect them to have a good fellow trained by somebody who doesn't have accomplishments. The good science in the project, the institution, there must be something else missing. Also, but the project is judged on slightly different criteria. Is it a good training experience? As opposed to, is it innovative and good science? In this case, you could have a project that has some problems, but the reviewers will look at it and say, they'll figure out what those problems are. This will be a good training experience. So there's a number of criteria that are different for that. Okay? All proceedings are confidential. I'm not supposed to tell you what was discussed. I'd love to tell you about the worst grant I ever read. It was about 25 years ago. I really shouldn't, so I won't. It was really bad. But it was awful, awful, awful. And I remember it to this day. Who's allowed to be in the room? Obviously the study section members, the scientific review administrators, an administrative assistant, and program officers. That is people who are involved in the later on in evaluating whether these grants should go forward. But if you happen to be in Washington that day, you couldn't come and listen to my study section, no matter how much you wanted to. Okay? This is a typical study section. This is a real study section. Now, this was a long time ago when grants were on paper. So when your PI says, I'm going to study sections, I'm going to Washington or Chicago or San Francisco, and you say, oh, lucky you, you get to travel. This is a windowless room in the basement of a hotel. The study section starts about 8 o'clock in the morning, finishes when, Amy?
Actually, normally we start at 7:30.
All right.
Until latest 8.
8 o'clock. So you might have time to run across the street and get some food late in the day. So it's not a picnic. These people are there to work. Stacks and stacks of paper in front of them. These have been replaced with laptops and PDF files. But the point is that this is a lot of work. They take it seriously. So your discussion, your grants are discussed. So if we look at the specific aims and we're excited by them, then we talk about them. If there's one person who thinks the aims are really good, one thing who thinks the project is really good, it'll still be discussed, even if the other people think it's awful. Because it only takes one person to cause the grant not to be discussed. And then it'll be discussed. I object, okay, we'll discuss it, and then they discuss it, and then everybody says, okay, it's really bad, and then they give it a score. So what that means is that when you get a score that's at the bottom of the scoring range, in about the 50th percentile, there's probably a whole bunch of unscored grants that were better than yours. But they were agreed upon in advance that they weren't so good. Yours had controversy, and somebody was stubborn and didn't see the problems until it was discussed. So it's not necessarily a badge of dishonor not to be discussed, or just to get a score that's just barely above the 50th percentile. While the meeting is going on, since they've got their grants on their laptop, the PDF files are there. While I'm talking about how great this grant is, everybody's going to say, oh, it's a great grant. I better pay attention. I want to know. They take their vote seriously because everybody in the room has a vote that counts the same, whether they've read the grant or not. It counts the same. If there's 20 people in the room, their vote is 1/20th of the total. Okay? It's a mean, an average. What other word can I use, Naomi? First moment. What? First moment, all right? So the point is that everybody's vote counts the same. While that's happening, if you're reviewing the grant, I'm going to quickly go through it and say, okay, do I agree with what he's saying? Or if you're pointing out problems, do I agree with that those are problems? Oh, or if it's an area that I'm interested in, I'm going to perk up and say, oh, I better check this out. I know this work. And look at the pictures, look at the aims, and decide for myself. At the end of the presentation of the 3 reviewers, the SRA is going to ask the group, does anybody else have any points, problems, issues? I read this grant, and I think I was, in fact, the reviewer the last time it was submitted. And this is so tremendously improved, and one of the big problems has been fixed, and et cetera, but there's still a fatal flaw, whatever the reviewer thinks. So different people who aren't your reviewers can end up having a big influence on the score. The score that's given is the mean of all the scores of all the reviewers, but the score that each reviewer gives can be really heavily influenced by the reputation and the presenter of the primary, secondary, or tertiary reviewers. If I'm very generous with my scores, and I give every grant that's in my field a very, very good score. By the time I do that 3 times, my credibility is shot. Because the 4th time I do it, they're going to think about it and say, well, this guy had 10 grants. He can't possibly have 4 of them in the top 10%, just by definition. So my reputation then becomes worthless. And even if the very best grant that I've ever reviewed in my life is the next one, and I give that one a really, really high score, and the other 2 reviewers give it a lower score, a less good score, the rest of the people in the room are going to believe them, because I've shot my credibility in the foot, and my opinion is no longer worth anything. So reviewers are very careful. They know that their opinion is worth something, and they really do give it a score that reflects what they really think, and they don't give it a score, in my opinion, that reflects, Amy Song is a fabulous scientist. No matter what she writes, I'm going to give her 100,000 points bonus extra for being a fabulous scientist. Yeah?
I have several comments. For the fellowship applications, they are also triaged.
Oh, it depends on the study section. They didn't used to be.
The oncology one, the cancer one, it's
There's also triage
triaged.
at the American Cancer Society.
Because we only have 2-day meeting.
Okay.
Usually it's the second day we want to go home
Yeah.
earlier.
All right.
And then what that means is more than 60% are triaged. But you can champion if one of the reviewers said that,
Right.
this shouldn't be
Yeah, if 2 of the 3 reviewers want to triage a grant or a fellowship, the 3rd one can say, I want to discuss it, and it will be discussed. Is that true for your experience?
Another thing is that if, like you said about the credibility, we can actually vote outside of the range.
That's right.
Of the 3 reviews,
I was going to get to that.
but we just have to submit our own review.
But the vote that the reviewers give generally has more influence on the rest of the study section than somebody who votes out of range. But not always. Because when I volunteer that I'm voting out of range, or I will often volunteer, I agree with Mike's review, and whatever, whether Mike was high or low, and other people will give, they thought that Raid was too generous, and so we're not going to vote as well as he suggested. So people can, the discussion can actually indicate what other people in the room believe and what they believe from the reviewers. So there's a lot of, right, Amy? You agree with that? Okay, so we're fine. So the point is that when you make your grant easy to understand, the more likely you are to get a good score. Because people are going to try to read it in the 10 minutes while somebody else is talking, which is not as good as reading it on the plane on the way there, but it's still a project. Formal review criteria. These are for NIH. Is the problem important? Is the approach good? Is it innovative? High risk, high reward can be considered a good point. Obviously, high risk, low reward is bad. Low risk, high reward is also really good. So you've got all of those various things. Is the investigator appropriately trained? If I wrote a grant about the rain in Spain, let's face it, I don't have any credentials in rain gauge collection. I certainly don't have any credentials in archaeology. I would not get a good score on those things. So you have to have experience doing what you're doing. Your collaborators, let's say I'm writing a grant and I can do everything in it except for method 5. So I call up my friend at the University of elsewhere and I say, can you help me with method 5? And he or she will say yes, and I'll say, all right, good, I'd like to send my graduate student there for 2 months to learn to do method 5. And they'll write a letter to you saying, dear Richard, I'm delighted to have your graduate student come and visit me. As you know, we're the developers and world experts on method 5. Please we welcome your graduate student. They'll work closely with my postdocs, and I guarantee you that we'll get results. Study section reads that, they'd like that. You're learning something. They especially like it in fellowships because you're going to go someplace and learn something new that you can't learn where you are. They love that. You're going to get good training. Collaborators, environment, all right. I'm at the University of Nowheresville. They don't even have a library. The internet is down most of the time. They're not going to be very pleased with that. You're in a fabulous place like Tallahassee, Florida. They're going to give you great tier 1 research institution. They're going to give you good score for the environment. So back to right to want when. Mike said he reads the abstract first. I don't disagree with that. A lot of people read the abstract first, but it's really written for 2 reasons. I wrote down it's for lay people. It's what gets published. If you Google the grants, I think CRISP is where they are now. Is that still active? What? Report. They change the name all the time. So you can find everybody's abstract there, and it'll be abstract. It won't be the specific aims. But they also use it, I saw it the other day, is they now take, when you send in your grant, they take the words from the abstract, paste them into a website, and it tells them what's the best study section for that grant. Apparently you can do this online. Have you seen this? Apparently you can do this yourself. So when you're trying to write a cover letter that says, "Dear review panel, I would like my grant to be reviewed by study section X, Y, and Z," you can do it in advance, and if you've got the word, fly or archaeological dig or whatever it is in there in your abstract, that will change which study section it gets assigned. It'll give you a list of study sections prioritized by the field. They use the abstract for that. All right. So people these days are now rewriting their abstract in order to get their grants assigned to the study sections they want. All right. When you write a paper, you got tens of people reading it, hundreds of people reading it. When you write a grant, there's probably three readers. You're not writing for a big audience. Better be good though, because these people are making a key decision. All right, I told you who are these blankety blank reviewers? People like me. People like Mike, people like Amy, people like some of you, will be soon, and people like your bosses. They're experts in the field. No, they're not. They're people who have written funded grants in the past, probably in the recent past. I told you this already. It's like, don't underestimate your reviewer. And that was the purpose of that first exercise. You were writing a grant to your mother. We all know how mothers think. They want their children to be successful. They don't want them to be party goers. At least 28 to 2 people agreed with that perspective. You have to figure out what reviewers write. When you write it, enumerate things. Use graphs. Use white spaces so that it's easy to read. Nothing worse than having 5 consecutive pages with no white space except for the paragraph indent. You just get bleary-eyed and you don't really know what's going on. I like to enumerate things. 1, 2, 3 bullets. I'll put a figure in here to break up the page. Make it pretty. Don't write to the page limit. When you're writing the grant the first time, I've seen people do this. They come to me and they say, well, I only had 5 pages. And I said, but you left out X. And they say, oh no, that's important. So the first draft, don't pay attention to the page limit. You have 1 page for the specific aim. Write until you've got your specific aims down. If it's 5 pages, fine. Get somebody to read it, figure out how to shorten it. Get your ideas down on paper, then edit. Okay? These days, I had one student who came to my office a few weeks ago and couldn't write a grant. So while we were doing that, I said, pull out your figures. He pulled out his figures. I dictated an email to him and sent it to him. And then he was posting these emails into his grant as we were going, paragraph at a time. So if you have writer's block, remember, you're supposed to teach. Many of you have experience standing up in front of a bunch of strangers teaching. Well, stand up in front of there, talk into your cell phone. The dictation will come back. There'll be a lot of misspellings, but you'll get your ideas down and the sequence of information down, then you can edit it. It can save your life if you're trying to do this thing. I can see somebody likes that idea. So try it. I put this last one down. Use the appropriate font type. Not only do you have to do it because smaller type is harder to read, but there's font police. I got a grant sent back because I used the wrong size font. And so this remembers the most important thing about writing a grant. Read the instructions. And then when you're done, read them again. Make sure you've done it right. Make sure you've got your stuff in the right order, that if they tell you you need a background section separate from a significant section, do it that way. I was just helping somebody with a Department of Defense grant. They have a completely bizarre order they want the grant written in. Don't try to force it into your NIH style. Write it the way they want. In that case, the background comes first and the aims don't come until you're 3 pages in. So you would like them. Oops, what did I do? I turned it off. Okay? Keep it simple and teach. You want them to understand what you say. All right. Make everything obvious. We can go through this. There's more of this. I don't know how many more pages I have like this. Is there? Are we pretty much done with time, right? A few more minutes? Okay. Oh, we have until 5. Oh, I can keep talking. This is now guidelines for the kind of language to use. Remember, tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them what you told them. Use simple things like you do when you teach. In this section, the background and justification for aim 1 is provided. You're telling them, very simple, this is where you go to find the background for aim 1. They don't have to search for it. Remember, they're tired, they're cranky, they're stupid. Help them. Use lists. Background and significance. This is where, how do you fit your pictures into a larger question. I remember once I wrote a grant where I said, there are 7 reasons to do this work on the mouse hippocampus. Hippocampus is a part of the brain involved in memory. So I listed all 7 reasons. A few months later, after one of the scientific meetings, I had somebody from study section come up and say, that was really good, we really liked that. So this is the kind of thing, tell them why you're telling them this information. It's very bad. Lots of people just write a background section and they write down all kinds of stuff and it's a stream of unconsciousness like they're writing a bad review. Tell them why you're telling them this particular fact. Okay? This is, there was a article on a story on the BBC the other day about an island somewhere in the Pacific that had a tsunami in the 200 years ago that went through it and wiped out the population. And so there was a bottleneck in the population. And the king who survived had a gene for color blindness. So now about 40% of the island is colorblind. I just thought that was a really cool thing. I have no idea where this island is, but it's if you're interested. But the point is, there's a very simple background to that story. Why did I tell them that? If I told them that I was going to this island to study color blindness, I have to tell them why I'm going. Why is this color blindness there? What's going on? What makes this interesting? All right. You are partly in the background showing them that you're intellectually capable of making a contribution to the field. If your background is just a stream of facts, you're not demonstrating your intellect. All you do is demonstrating that you know how to use a bibliography. You know how to use the bibliography search tool and you know how to cite things. You want to integrate, why is it that I'm citing this paper by Jones or this paper by Rizkala or whatever the why is it that this is important? Make everything you say in the background relevant to your hypotheses. There's 2 opposing views in the field. View 1 says that this is true. View 2 says that this is true. We propose our hypothesis, which is that both fields are right because they've ignored this phenomenon and this integrating center of magic that makes all things knowable, whatever is their hypothesis. All right? So I've just said all of this. It's not a review of the literature. Integrate the significance into your presentation. I can go help you with that when the time comes. Preliminary results. A lot of people think the preliminary results has to be definitive demonstration that the experiments that you're proposing are correct. A lot of times people go too far with that. If your preliminary results demonstrate that your hypothesis is correct, well then why should I give you money to do more experiments? So what you want to do is use your preliminary results to be more at the borderline, to convince the reviewers that you have the knowledge to do the methods that you need. They might speak generally in the direction, but you also have to be explicitly clear why they're not quite they're not the be-all and end-all. Why do you need to do more experiments? Again, be explicit. Explain yourself. All right, preliminary data. Like I said, don't look at the figures in your publication. I like to call the background and significance sections the B&S section for obvious reasons, because sometimes it is. Now, the experimental design section should mirror your aims. So that in fact, I use the same words. I will literally cut the words out of my aim section and put them at the first paragraph of the experimental design, and begin with the aim of experiment 1 is to do this. And then I'll add, space and another header and talk about how we're going to test this hypothesis. And use some significant, my 8th grade English teacher was Mrs. Koss, and she loved parallel structure, right? Beth smiles because she writes grants. Parallel structure means you write all of these sections so they're the same organization. And this is part of my philosophy, is that when you write science, you're not writing a feature article for the section of the newspaper, or you're not writing the kind of article that you wrote, the kind of essay that you wrote in English class when you were in high school or your first year of college and they told you to write an essay about the ocean and what you did on your summer vacation, and you said, oh, the sky was beautiful and the ocean, beautiful sky blue, and the ocean was aqua and green and all this other stuff that you were painting a picture. When you write science, if it's bubbly, if a solution is bubbly, it can't be effervescent. It's got to be one or the other. Use the same word every time. If it's blue, it's not aqua. So don't change the way you use it because you remember your English teacher in high school or freshman English told you you can't use the same verb 3 times in the same paragraph. If you use the same verb, well, look, I'm a scientist. I'm going to think you mean something different. If you use a different adjective, I'm going to think it's a different solution because I'm stupid. I'm not looking for, I actually suffer from a condition called metaphor blindness. About 5% of the population suffers from metaphor blindness. There's a huge literature on this consisting of 1 scientific paper. But basically, I don't understand metaphors. And so, if poetry was really hard for me. So it's hard to do this. And I think a lot of scientists have metaphor blindness. So remember that scientists are very literal for the most part. Try to aim for them directly. So if you have 3 aims, you should have 3 subsections. Label them clearly. Specific aim 1, specific aim 2, specific aim 3. If you're using animals, have an animal section in each aim. Not just 1 animal section, but have 3 animal sections. If you're using special tools, have a special tools section. Yeah?
What if you're using the same animals for aim 1 and aim 2?
Then I would say very clearly, in aim 2, I would say the same animals are being used for this experiment that were used for aim 1. And if it's literally the same animal, I would emphasize this. Say something like the other half of the brain, or the pancreas from the same animal that we use the hearts for. Tell them. Why? Because they don't remember. Because they're stupid. I know that because I don't remember when I read a grant. So help them.
So don't worry so much about being redundant.
Each section should sort of stand on itself, on its own. You don't want to, you don't want them to have to turn the page to go back and remember what you did. You want to help them. Yeah.
So to piggyback off him, if I'm doing like a questionnaire for one of my methods, and I explain what the questionnaire is made of in aim 1, and aim 2, I would explain the questionnaire.
Well, you could explain how it's different from aim 1. So you can refer back to aim 1. So you can, when I said to tell them that you're going to use the same animals as in aim 1, then they can refer back to it. But don't expect them to remember that. So if you're using the same question format, or if you're changing the question format, so in contrast to the blankety blank question format we used in aim 1, we're going to use, for this aim, we're going to use the question format that was designed by Smith and Jones in order to penetrate deeply through people's subconscious behaviors, right? You get what I'm saying? So you're going to explain why it's different or why it's the same. So again, it's tell them why you're doing it. All right. This gets pretty... Oh, this is exactly what we were talking about. Reviewers are really impressed if you do things like this. Refer to other aims and section of the grant. Make it look like the grant, like that you thought about it. So use sentences like, as discussed in the background and significance section, this is true. Or there are 17 publications that use this method. Using the methods described for figure 4 in the preliminary results, we're going to do the following experiment. What this does is let you save space, but also be clear. It tells them where to go for. It also tells them that you're careful. And if you think about it, it's not so much being careful that's important, it's not being sloppy. Because they're going to look at it, the reviewers are going to look at it and say, this grant is poorly written. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. This grant is poorly written. And we all scratch our heads and say, so what? This isn't a writing class. But if they don't understand it, they're not going to do it much. And if they think it's poorly written, then they're going to also think the science behind it is poorly designed. So you want to write in a way that's clear. Who in here does not have English as as their native language? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. So you guys have an advantage. We sometimes think that English is the international language of science. It's not. Logic is the international language of science. You can be perfectly capable of writing a logical grant that's full of grammatical errors. If it's a good grant and with really cool science, any reviewer will be happy to read it and will ignore the grammatical errors or the vocabulary problems because it's cool and exciting. So logic is what you want to strive for. To be logic and explicit and clear. Okay? That's true. So those of you who with non-native speakers of English, you still know logic. So finally, the literature cited. If people submit a grant and I'm the reviewer and it's a topic that I've worked on and they don't cite my papers and they don't cite my ideas, do I think that they've done a good job with the literature? Do I think they understand the field? No. Unfortunately, that's where some of the biases creep in. Well, in my case, I know it's that they don't understand the field because my work is really important. And that illustrates something. The reviewers are not just stupid, they're cocky bastards. They're there because they know they're good. They're there because they're selected. They're there because they were successful. They know stuff. And they know stuff. And the best praise you can get during a review section is for a reviewer to point to his computer screen or her computer screen and say, boy, I really learned a lot from this application. I learned something. Why? Because they're damn smart. And if you taught them something, then you must be smart too. Right? So if they, that's what you want. So citing the right literature is important. If you know that Mike Blaber's on your study section and you're writing a grant about protein biology, you better cite Mike Blaber's fabulous papers. Because Mike Blaber's going to notice that he's not cited. I'm going to notice that I'm not cited. I will notice that Mike Blaber's not cited if you write a paper on his stuff, because I know Mike Blaber's publications. So the reviewers know stuff, and they sometimes know things that you don't expect them to know because their next door neighbor is an expert in whatever it is that you're writing about. So make sure you cite the right people. Don't cite somebody just because you don't believe them. Cite them because you don't believe them, but tell the reviewers why you don't believe them. If there's a controversy in the field, explain it, especially if your project is going to resolve that controversy. What else we got here? Use a computer program for managing citations. You can tell I made that slide a long time ago. Does anybody not use a computer program for managing their citations? All right, everybody does. Make it easy to read. Boldface. Use a minimum of italics and underlining. I hate a grant that's got 17 paragraphs in a row underlined because they think it's important, because now it's no longer important. It's like crying wolf. Make things boldface. Pay attention to detail, because most reviewers think that if you pay attention to detail when you write your grant, you're going to pay attention to detail when you do your science. And that's illustrating to you that I've read grants by Nobel laureates, and I've looked at them and I said, boy, this is really badly written. I don't understand what the project is. I bet this was written by the postdoc who's not named in the budget. And so they get a bad score, despite the fact that they're a Nobel laureate. What happens almost every time is 6 months later you're back in that windowless room in the hotel in Washington, and you're reading the same grant, the resubmission of that grant from the Nobel laureate. It is incredibly, fabulously good. The attention to detail is amazing. Every I is dotted, metaphorically, every T is crossed, everything is correct, and you're blown away by it. So if you get sloppy, it doesn't matter who you are. You're not going to get scored well. So if you can imagine that if you're sloppy, and I don't think you have a Nobel Prize yet, right? All right, so if you're sloppy, not yet, all right answer. If you're sloppy, you're going to get dinged just like the Nobel laureate gets dinged. So pay attention to detail so that your grant is like the Nobel laureate's the second time. Okay? What do we got left? Put pictures in. I like this kind of picture. This picture illustrates question marks where the specific aims would be. I like to take a picture of a diagram of something where you show causal, put arrows on it, say 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are going to be tested by aims 1, 2, 3, and 4 respectively. And you can make these things however you want, whether it's about a metabolic pathway or a protein cascade, or any other kind of analysis. Find readers. I've already volunteered multiple times to read your grants. Find other non-specialists. Read it backwards. Give it to your mother to read. Give it to your aunt who's got a 12th grade education. Get lots of people to read it. You want people who can read it in different ways, who can tell you what they think is good, who can tell you what they don't understand.
Good question. Where would the schematic summary aims go?
I would put that in the aim section. Sure, why not? There's no reason you can't put a picture in the aim section. You could put it in the background section if you needed to and refer to it. You can do you can do anything you want. Okay? So get somebody from your field to read it, get a proofreader to read it. all kinds of people should read it, and you should listen to what they say. If somebody writes, if you give me your grant and I say, look, I don't understand aim 3, or I don't understand these 2 sentences, it doesn't mean that what you wrote is wrong. It just, or that I'm right. It just means that you didn't explain it clearly. And this is the sort of the truth about scientific writing, is that the writer is always wrong. The reader is always right, even when they're wrong. So the reviewers are always right, even when they're wrong. Those blankety-blank reviewers. You've got to make it clear to them because you're better than they are. So, I think we did this, we've done that. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Remember that the point here is to be clear, get it read, write it early, right? Like Chicago voters, vote early, vote often. Write it early, rewrite it, write it often. Okay? So if you've got questions, good time. If we've interrupted, yeah.
So you mentioned that first aim should be something that's like a win-win, that's useful.
Yeah.
And I guess I've observed that if you have if a proposal has one bad section, that's all the panel will talk about. If you have a section that's not bad, but it is risky, right? Like you have something that you think is worth it from a high risk, high reward point of view, how do you present that in the proposal in a way that makes it clear it might not work, but you think that it's not going to kill you if one of your reviewers doesn't think it's going to work?
Okay. What do you think? I'm going to let you try to answer your own question. What would you want to see? If I came to you and I said, I've got this project, and you look at it and you say, that's pretty high risk, what's your next question? Anybody?
Maybe a backup plan?
What's plan B? Is there an alternative approach? Okay. How do you propose to minimize the risk? Is there another way to do it? I would first of all be very clear. This is a high risk aim. Tell them right from the beginning. If it works, it means that the Higgins-Doolittle hypothesis is wrong. The rain in Spain does not fall mainly on the plain. They'd have to rewrite My Fair Lady. Very world-shattering event, right? So you tell them. Because if they think it and you don't tell them, then they don't know that you know it. Okay? So you have to teach them that it's a high risk. And then you have to say, okay, I'm going to do this. And if that doesn't work, I'm going to do that. Or if that shows that that's negative, then that means that this other hypothesis is true. And so therefore, instead of experiment 2A, I'm going to do experiment 2B. So presenting an alternative, a branch point, based on that kind of high risk, high reward, that's fine. There's all kinds of ways of dealing with it. But the most important thing is to be upfront. Does that make sense? And this is why you get a whole bunch of readers, because one of them is going to have a good idea. One of them is going to see risk and rewards where others don't see risks and rewards. Okay? The thing about, I can read anybody's grant in the room, even an archaeology grant, and I can tell you whether it's got logic, whether it's a good proposal, but I can't tell you whether your archaeology grant advances the field of archaeology. Okay? That's where you have to have an expert read it, presumably another archaeologist. But anybody in this room can read anybody else's grant and know that it's logically presented. Those are really valuable inputs to get from somebody outside of your field who knows how to be logical, how to think about scientific concepts. Doesn't matter if they're archaeological concepts or cell cycle concepts or neuroscience concepts or questionnaire concepts. What field are you in? Education? Public health? So, you know.
So, if I propose something I have technologically, and so I can get a supporting letter from someone, or I can list someone's copyright. So, what will be the recommended approach?
Well, I think that if it's somebody who's in the next lab, co-PI, if it's somebody who's 2,000 miles away, get a letter and an agreement to go there and learn the method. If it's something in between, then you've got to maybe do something in between. That's just my seat of the pants answer. But if you're a graduate student or a postdoc writing a fellowship, then you put that expert on your mentoring committee and you go there to learn the technique, and you call that, and that improves the training quality of your application. Most people really need training from people other than their mentor. So you want multiple people to be your trainers. Whether they're across campus or across the country, having a training committee that consists of multiple people will strengthen your proposal. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's sort of my idea. Yeah.
So people say that in your specific page, usually 3 is a magic number. So just you have 3.
I like 3. You know, you look at it and you say, well, 5 is too many. I sort of put 1 aim a year. If it's a 2-year grant, I'd only have 2 aims. But there's nothing magic about it. It's just the way I like to think. And I think the review, you know, I've seen grants with 20 specific aims. And then you look at it and you say, I have no idea how long each of these aims will take. And then it gets confusing. So I think that having, you know, if you've got 20 specific aims, then you should collect them into 5 or 3 or 7 or some other number by putting the aims together. There's no reason you can't have 1 aim with 3 experiments. Right? So group things into a number that's conceptualizable. My brain deals with 3 pretty well. 5 is hard. She's a statistician, so she can deal with 7 in orthogonal dimensions. Go ahead, Nomi.
I was talking for somebody else's grant. I was listening to the program officer talk, and they kept saying, like, trying to do too much or trying to do too much. And I've heard that that's the rookie mistake, that you do too much.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of find that balance between, you know, you have 3 aims, 2 aims, or whatever, but just like the program officer can see right through it, she's like, this is 3 aims, but it's really like, you know, way more than that.
So let me tell you a story. All right, I like stories. So this is a woman who came to me. She was a faculty member when I was in New Jersey. She had written a grant. She came to me 3 days before the deadline and say, Richard, you helped recruit me. You know this field. Can you read my grant? Before I submitted, it's due on Monday. It was a Friday or Thursday or something like that. I said, sure, I can read your grant. But if, you know, and I took it home. I said, I'll read it. I'll come back tomorrow morning. We can discuss it. Now, this was a case where I said yes to a 25-page grant because it was a good friend. You say yes to good friends. She came back the next morning and I said, Patrizia, this is too ambitious. They're going to come back and say this is too much work. It's unfocused, that you can't do it. This was her first grant, rookie mistake. And she said, oh my God, what should I do? And I said, well, it's due in 3 days. Send it in. Let's see what they say. So she sent it in. 6 months later, she comes into my office and she's got the summary statement. Guess what it said? It's too ambitious. You can't do all this work. In fact, it wasn't scored. She said, oh my God, what do I do? So I read through the summary statement. I read her grant again, and I said, well, this is easy. You take aim 2 and 3, and you throw them out, and then you take aim 1 and expand it into 3 aims. And she said, oh my God, I can't do that. Aims 2 and 3 are really, really important to my research program. I said, okay, all right. So I tried another approach. I said, Patrizia, take aims 2 and 3, set them aside and save them for the next grant. And she said, oh, I can do that. So then she took aim 1 and expanded it into 3 aims. Sent that in. You know, obviously we worked on it in the meantime. Got 6 months later, she came back with a re-review, and it said, well, it was scored. It was like a 25th percentile. And it said, this is too ambitious. You can't do all of this, etc. Still a little bit too ambitious. So she said, oh, God, what do I do? And I said, Patrizia, you know the answer. She said, okay. I said, in this case, you've already done most of aim 1. So take aim 2, the rest of aim 1 and aim 2, turn that into 3 aims, set aim 3 aside and save it for the next grant. So she sent that in and came back with the number 1 grant in the study section. Okay? The last time she left the medical school I was at with 8 grants as a full professor at Mount Sinai Medical School, and she's the director of a big fancy institute. And she's very grateful because she always claims that I taught her to write grants, but she taught herself. The point is that she took a grant that she had a really good coherent idea for a research program that would have been appropriate for the lab she came from. She wrote it in such a way that it was way out of her league, way too much work for the resources she had. In the end, she got 1/9 of her original proposal funded. She eventually took those other aims, turned those into grants. So I'm not sure that this story tells the... She used that formula we had, by the way, the hypothesis is.
She actually ended up with more money that way.
Oh, you bet. She was loaded.
The answer is get senior colleagues to read it. Get a lot of people to read it.
Yeah, I mean, this is why the point is that, you know, I've read 8,000 grants. I know what's too ambitious in my field. I wouldn't know if your archaeology grant was too ambitious. Sorry. I might, you know, if you were going to go off and completely dig up all of the Mayan relics in Guatemala, that might not work, right? Yep.
So talk about, you know, you've got different reviewers to comment on your proposal. What do you know, they have control.
Aha. So in other words, if I say something and Mike Blaber says something different, what do? Well, it's your grant. You have to decide. You have to use your judgment, think about what I said, talk with Mike, think about what he says, and decide. Maybe get a third opinion. Maybe bring in the archaeologist to dig through our brains and decide.
I don't do gooey things.
No? Okay. All right. Dig through our crania after she dissolved the brain.
Lacerated, then I'll look at
Yeah, right. Okay. So she would just look at our skulls. So, I mean, that's the bottom line, is that it's your decision. You have to decide. And then, of course, the reviewers will help you eventually.
Here's something I just thought of. I hadn't thought about this, but I don't know why I just popped in my head. But what about these, so you're talking, you know, you made the joke about you get free consulting. And what about these paid grant writing consultants? I don't really know much about it, but I mean, what do you think about that sort of thing?
I think it depends on how much help you need and what your field is. Some of these grant writing consultants are good. I know a couple of them. Some of them aren't. So, do I give free consulting to anybody from FSU? Yeah. If somebody called me up and said, could you read my grant? Here's $500. I'd probably say yes. Take their money. So, was my review be any better for them than it is for you? No. So, I think it depends. You have to know what they are. A lot of times the people who go into that are people who didn't make it and are writing other people's grants even though their own grants never got funded. Sometimes they're people who are retired who really know their field. And that's okay. That knowledge stays good for a half-life of, 5 to 7 years, but then it decays. Just like, well, half-life, this is a scientific audience, I don't have to explain that. Anybody have any other questions? Come on down. I think that's what Beth is telling us, right?
Well, I'm gonna. Oh, you have one more question.
Yeah, that's a more general question, I guess, but for K99 application,
Yep.
do I treat that proposal just like an hour-long grant?
No. Because K99 applications have to have a training component that you have to do at the institution you're at. So you need a training committee. The project has to have training value. So There's some other things. Should be a little more innovative. They're hard to get. So I'm sure we could sit down and talk about it. I've reviewed K99s. So
I wrote down 10 points from what Richard said that I just want to highlight.
3 is the right number, so just read the first 3. I'm sorry,
Well,
I'm just joking.
So number 1, and this comes, I think they resonate because we've been looking at a lot of career proposals coming from NSF lately, and some of the things he said, I just want to yell, yes, write this down. So, and some of them he emphasized more than others, so I just wanted to hit a few of them. Number 1, start writing early. Please, start writing early. He mentioned about sloppy. I can tell you from ones that we read, the later you are, the sloppier they get, because you don't have time to think clearly and put them together in a way that is easy to understand. Having several eyes on your proposal is so important. Our office does this for faculty. We will read proposals, but we can't read for the science. So we're always saying, do you have faculty looking at this as well that know your science, but we'll read and we can go through and see how it flows. And just like a reviewer, if we're lost, that's a problem. That's a problem. So please give the reviewers enough time to review it, and give yourself time, because they could come back where you're going to have some time to rewrite. Like he was mentioning, when somebody comes a few days before, how are they going to have time to really do anything? And we feel bad. It's like, wow, this needs major revision, and they're giving it to us 2 days before. That's going to be a problem. Read successful proposals if you can. For our faculty, we have a database of successful proposals that you can access.
Excellent.
Yes, we have NIH, we have NSF, we have DOD, DOE. We add to it every month as people get awarded. We go ask people, we say, congratulations, can we get a copy of your proposal to share with faculty? And a lot of them give them to us. So we have this database you can go read even if you haven't done them yourself. Teaching the reviewer. Great advice. Great advice. Schematics. Make sure they're relevant, because we have seen people, some people have a theory of you need a picture on every page. Well, if the picture doesn't really give any information that's helpful, or, a picture being worth 1,000 words, if you're talking about how this is going to help, make the Boeing 727s more efficient, having a picture of the plane does not add anything.
Everybody knows what a plane looks like.
Yes, so you don't need that. So don't waste your valuable space on a picture just because you want a picture. Leaving white space. I can't tell you how many times we see these walls, these text walls, and they're so cumbersome to read. The white space, think about brevity. You can say what you need to say and still leave white space. Just take the time to do it. Make it easier for the reviewer to read. That follows right along. Read the instructions. When I first started getting involved in proposal development, I thought, oh gosh, how hard is it? But it is. It can be. The PAPG with NSF, it's huge. But take the time to know what it requires. We've seen people get thrown out for fonts. I've seen them get thrown out for margins. These things are important, so pay attention to it. And lastly, if you're going for federal funding, contacting sponsored research, let them know you're going to be coming. That's important, because they could have a whole bunch of people coming in at the same time, and they need to be able to budget out their time so people can look.
And they have deadlines that come, surprisingly, their deadlines come before the agency's deadlines.
Sponsored research has a 3-day deadline. Now, you don't have to work with proposal development, but you have got to work with sponsored research, and they need that time. And you'll make your people very unhappy when you show up the day of.
So one of the Beth's got 10 points. She should have done them backwards like Letterman. We would have been more amused. But the point here is that a lot of those had to do with writing. And the American educational system separates us scientists from the humanists and social study people pretty early in our education. So the people who end up in humanities and social studies know how to use periods and commas and semicolons and how to analyze the text. The only thing we know about punctuation is the periodic table, and that's not very good for writing. So we're not educated well to write, most of us. Now, in our program department, I don't know if you guys know, Katie Wright has an undergraduate degree, a minor in English. If you need something read, go to her. She's graduating in October, so do it fast. But every department's going to have one or two resources of people who are really good writers and really know how text should be constructed. You need to cultivate those people in your departments and get them to help you, because the rest of us are handicapped with respect to that, because that wasn't part of our education. So find those people, buy them lunch, get them friendly. You know, now I don't know, your field is probably a lot more mixed between science and humanities people. Right, and your field the same way, but this is there's a difference. In public health, you've got people who are quant jerks, quant nerds, right? My daughter's got a degree in public health, so I know that. The point is that you've got these very, very diverse backgrounds, and so you can go to these people and get help from them, and in turn we should go to you and get help from you.
Trade that for statistics.
Talk to Naomi.
Yeah.
So that's the point. There you have a weakness. If you need statistics, you need to find somebody who can help you with statistics. And Naomi is a really good statistician. And she's good. And if you're in biology, you need bioinformatics, and that's an important thing, because the sequencing of the genome has changed everything. It doesn't matter what you're doing, everybody's going to do it. If you're in computer modeling in practically every other field, physics and chemistry. And so there's all kinds of skills that most of us don't have. 1 + 1, meaning you plus another person equals 3 or 5. Granting agencies recognize that you're adding skill sets and improving the quality of the science that's done. Right?
Right. So please help me thank Richard for his talk today.
I'm really surprised that so many people stayed.
And please, if you didn't sign over here on the attendance sheet, it helps us to know how many people came. We'd appreciate that. Thank you for coming.